Russian nuclear fuel into the UK, which is a major energy security and national security issue for the country. And this, my lords, is not due to be phased out until 2030. So does the Minister agree that we need to urgently legislate to bring this date forward to the near term, as our allies in the US are doing, with all of the attendant benefits for our domestic industry?
I certainly agree we should look at this. We have been effective in terms of taking Russian gas out of our system, in terms of taking Russian oil out of our system. And I think if you look across Europe, it's been pretty remarkable what steps have been taken to reduce the dependence on Russian oil and gas. Just last week, we made the announcement about excluding Russia from the London Metals Exchange and other related exchanges. And I think this is the next area we should look at. I've had a letter from the Ukrainian Foreign Minister that I saw just this morning about this issue, and we're certainly going to take it away and look at it. It is, of course, a case for the Department of Energy and Net Zero. It's their responsibility. They deal specifically with Urenco, the company that delivers our nuclear fuel, but we'll take this away.
My Lords, I certainly welcome the Foreign Secretary's continued unity with the opposition. We're one with them and one with the government in terms of defeating Russian aggression. Recently, he said that we will ensure that we can make sure Russia pays for its aggression through the use of frozen assets. He said he would want to seek unity between the G7 and the EU. Can he update us on that? Can I also raise another issue that I've raised with the Noble Lord Ahmed frequently, which is the $2 billion from the sale of Chelsea, which is still languishing somewhere. Can he update us and say why we are not able to ensure that $2 billion is used for the immediate support of the people of Ukraine?
I can certainly update the House on both of those issues. On the issue of how we use the frozen Russian assets, I've been perhaps one of the most enthusiastic about this, just seeing you've got the frozen assets, you know Russia's going to have to pay reparations, give the money now to Ukraine, get it paid back by the reparations when they come. The difficulty is trying to get consensus around the EU and in the United States. And to be fair to European Union countries, the majority of the sovereign assets are in their countries. They have the direct interest in it, particularly Belgium with the money in Euroclear. I think there is an emerging consensus that the interest on those assets can be used to support much larger financial support for Ukraine. So I'm confident at the G7 foreign ministers and at the G7 meeting, an answer around which America, the UK, France, Germany, others can coalesce. And if we can get that done, we really will be able to provide real financial firepower to Ukraine, based on those assets rather than delivering the assets directly. On the Chelsea situation, it's immensely frustrating because that, as he says, I think it could be as much as $2.5 billion, is sitting there, potentially one of the biggest charitable organisations in Britain, and it's very frustrating. We can't get money out of the door. The disagreement is whether all of the money has to go into Ukraine for the benefit of people of Ukraine who've suffered from the war, or whether any of the money can be spent in other countries, not Russia, not Belarus, but have suffered from the Ukraine war. That is the difficulty with the people who set up this trust, and we have to try and resolve that with the European Union, with Portugal, where Abramovich, I think, has citizenship. We're working very hard because what I don't want is for month after month to go by and the money hasn't got out of the door. So we're working at it very hard, but it is difficult to try and get everybody into alignment, but we're on it.
My Lord, if we actually believe that Putin is a threat to the West, should we start thinking about defending ourselves? And if so, has my noble friend, the Foreign Secretary, considered following the Swedish example of total defense service, including selective system of conscription? It would, at any rate, bolster young people's self-confidence, teach them to work in teams, and give them the skills necessary to find a job once they leave the service.
Well, a lunch with the Swedish Foreign Minister yesterday to celebrate Sweden's accession to NATO, and they are an incredibly capable country. They're financially robust, they have very good armed forces, superb equipment. They're going to make NATO a lot stronger. I'm not going to be tempted down the line of sort of national service and all of that, but I think we're clearly going to need to improve the way we encourage people to join our armed forces, to encourage young people to join our armed forces, to make sure we get people to join our reserves, to make sure we meet all those targets. But I do think the core of our effort as a highly professional Army, Navy and Royal Air Force, that is the key to our defence.
I ask beg leave to call the question in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, last week the Prime Minister and President Macron spoke on illegal migration and European security. On Thursday, I will speak to Foreign Minister Séjourné at the G7, and I'm confident that the Prime Minister and President Macron will meet again in person before too long. My colleagues, the Defence and Home Secretaries and their teams similarly maintain regular, action-orientated dialogue with their French counterparts.
In the light of the forthcoming elections in the United States and the constant reiteration of senior Russians that tactical nuclear weapons should be used in their invasion of Ukraine, would it not be a very good thing if the French and British heads of government got together and discussed their own targeting strategies for the nuclear weapons that they possess in Europe, and give some guidance to the world and to Europe, and above all to the Russians, about their attitudes to this constant invocation of nuclear weapons being used in Ukraine?
Thank the Noble Lord for his question. He clearly has huge experience in this area. What I would say is that the Lancaster House Agreement that I signed with President Sarkozy in 2010 expressly sets out areas where Britain and France will collaborate, and that does include the most sensitive areas of nuclear weapon research and nuclear weapons. But if what he's saying is there a deeper dialogue we need to enter into to think about these things for the future, I would agree. Of course, Britain's nuclear deterrent is declared to NATO, and I'm in favour of us having deeper conversations with the French about this, but I still maintain that one of the aims of NATO, as Parg Ismay would have put it, was to keep the Americans in and the Russians out. I think is still absolutely key to NATO's future. I missed out that bit, he will be pleased to notice, is key to NATO's future. And I think one of the things we have to do is to make sure we're talking to all parts of the American system to make sure that NATO is in the strongest possible shape in its 75th year, with more members reaching 2%, so that whoever becomes president at the end of this year can see that NATO is an institution worth investing in.
My lords, there is no better display of French-British cooperation than...
Having in an earlier incarnation had the opportunity to introduce the French Minister of Defence to our nuclear facilities, and myself visiting Saint-Nazaire, where the French showed me their facilities as well. The importance of the previous background of our nuclear collaboration, this is where Lord Owen is absolutely right. Against a background where perhaps the United States is showing less interest in NATO and maybe future involvement maybe not be so obvious and immediate. Make clear that the nuclear arrangements and nuclear understanding between this country and France is of manifest importance. If I may say so, I think the point about the Prime Ministers of both countries and the Foreign Secretaries need to be very closely involved against the dangerous situation that we face in Europe at the present time.
The Noble Lord has huge experience with this. I would say it is a great year for Britain and France to be talking about these things. It's the 120th anniversary of the Entente Cordiale. We'll be commemorating D-Day again in June. There's the French Olympics, which we're sure will be a great success, and we're helping them with security and other issues. So, of course, that dialogue, in line with the Lancaster House Agreement and its renewal, will be part of it. But I would say to the House, it's important we try to encourage America to see NATO as a huge positive. And, you know, one mustn't over-interpret this, but it was good news when yesterday, the US Speaker of the House of Representatives made this remark about the Ukraine funding. He said, "We have terrorists and tyrants and terrible leaders around the world like Putin, and they're watching to see if America will stand up for its allies and our own interests around the globe, and we will." And when asked about the Ukraine funding, said he expected to bring it forward this week. Now, there is positive news. So, as well as all the things we should be doing with European partners to strengthen NATO, we should do everything we can to encourage America to see it as part of its defence as well as ours.
The summit would... My Lords, we now know that the European Political Summit's fourth meeting will take place in Blenheim in July, the European Political Community, one of Macron's major initiatives to encourage all European countries to work together in security terms, and in particular to form a British-French partnership in leading European security. Can the Foreign Minister tell us when the government will be telling us more about what the agenda will be and how far it's going to consult with other parties about this particularly important multilateral summit in which Britain and France will be playing leading roles?
Well, first of all, I'm delighted that the EPC, the European Political Community meeting, is going ahead. I'm delighted it's at Blenheim, because that's in my old constituency and one of the finest places in Britain to hold a summit. We won't necessarily remind all the participants who was on which side at Blenheim, but I'm sure we can find a way through that. In fact, there were in fact Germans on both sides, so that perhaps will help. We'll certainly be talking, I'm sure, about security. We'll be talking about Ukraine, and I'm sure there'll be discussions as well about the issue of illegal migration, which we're all wrestling with around Europe, but I'm sure the Prime Minister will have more to say about it closer to the time.
Brown. My Lords, I don't disagree with the Foreign Secretary about the importance of the United States, but whether we like it or not, we're in a context where future US leadership can be hoped for but not relied upon. And in such a context, defence cooperation and coordination between the UK, France and the wider EU is crucial. President Macron has said, and I quote, "Our partnership with the UK must be raised to a different level." Given that openness to a deeper defence and strategic relationship, what discussions has the government had with France and other European allies in respect of the very important issue of coordinating defence production to ensure that our procurement harmonises rather than conflicts with the proposed European defence industry programme?
Very important question, and what I'd say to the noble lord is, first of all, I think that the way that the UK has worked with other European powers in response to Ukraine has shown that while we're outside the European Union, we can work together very effectively and put in place arrangements like those around the Wiesbaden arrangements and others that work extremely well. Of course, we should look at what other cooperation and collaboration we should do, but I think there are quite a lot of clarity that will be required, including about the European defence industrial strategy, about, on what terms is it open to non-EU members, because this only, collaboration makes sense if we're acting in a way that is benefiting not just our own industries as well as other European industries, but is also open to collaboration with others at the same time. So so far from everything I've seen in this job, is where you have good ad hoc arrangements and can make them work, that may well be better than a very structured and potentially rather bureaucratic dialogue, unless you're really getting what you want.
One area that the United Kingdom and France have worked closely together and given leadership on is nutrition. And I was very pleased to see that we've now got a date for the Paris Nutrition for Growth Summit, which will take place not this year, sadly, but next year on the 27th and 28th of March. Can he tell us, will he be raising support for the Nutrition for Growth Summit when he meets his counterpart, and will the Prime Minister be involved to ensure that the leadership both countries have given in terms of alleviating the world's problem of nutrition is delivered properly and we remain supportive?
I'll certainly raise that with my European counterpart, Stéphane Séjourné. The first of these summits actually happened at the London Olympics in 2012, but partly because it's a very important issue, but because we knew that Brazil, that has a very deep concern about this issue, was carrying out the next Olympics, so we could create that momentum. It was more difficult in Tokyo because of COVID and everything else, but I think this is a good opportunity to get this back on the road, and I'll certainly raise it with my counterpart.
My Lords, there surely was no better display of French-British cooperation than in the skies of the Middle East on Saturday night. Will the Foreign Secretary discuss with his French counterpart how we can increase the pressure on the regime in Tehran so that they might decide to allow the region to live in peace?
I think the noble lord, my noble friend, makes a very good point. In our case, I can say to the House that the Americans asked us to backfill their operations, our joint operations, of what is Op Shader, where we've been running a counter-ISIL, counter-Daesh operation in Iraq and Syria for many years now, and we're delighted to do that, to free up more of their planes to defend Israel. And at the same time, of course, we told our pilots they should shoot down any projectiles coming Israel's way in the process, and that's exactly what they did, and they did it with great skill and great ability. And he's right to say that Britain and France can work very closely together on this agenda. In terms of Iran, we have sanctioned hundreds of people in Iran. We've sanctioned the IRGC in its entirety. We'll be discussing with the French and others further steps we can take in order to discourage Iran from this behavior, further sanctions that should be put in place. We also need to look at the work we do together at the International Atomic Energy Authority, where we do need to have clear resolutions when Iran is in breach of the promises that it's made. And I think the point he makes more generally is right. When you look at this region, who is funding Hamas, who is funding the Houthis, who's funding Hezbollah? In every case, the answer is Iran.
My Lord's, apologies, and to the noble Lord Markham in particular, not currently in his place, for becoming impatient and intemperate during yesterday's questions. I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
Worried already, my Lords, we value the role of the Council of Europe, and we are a major contributor to the organisation. The Council of Europe's commitment to peace, freedom and democracy is best evidenced by its swift decision to expel Russia following the brutal invasion of Ukraine, and the launch of the Register of Damage, which will allow individuals to file claims for loss, injury and damage caused by Russia's invasion. The 75th anniversary will be celebrated at the ministerial meeting in May.
Sincerely grateful to the noble Lord, the Foreign Secretary, for what I think was an unequivocal answer to my question. We all know that he has an awesome responsibility at the moment to practice statecraft globally and to seek to explain it at home. With that in mind, when he is considering institutions like the UN, like NATO, like the Council of Europe, and dare I say it, the European Court of Human Rights, would he categorise them as international and worthy of our continued commitment and support, or foreign and worthy of repudiation and occasional contempt?
The noble lady is, I mean, the Council of Europe is so much more than the European Court of Human Rights. It's got over 200 conventions. They make practical contributions to things like the St. Denis Convention on Safety in Sport that underpinned the UK and Ireland's successful bid to host the 2028 European Football Championships. You've got the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing Violence Against Women, the Istanbul Convention, that helps the UK promote its gender equality priorities. And we should always keep the ECHR, the court, in proper context. I mean, since 1975, there have been 21,784 cases and only I think 329 judgments against the UK. So we have relatively little incoming, but, and it is a big but, there are occasions, in my view, when this court overreaches itself. And we saw one last week with respect to climate change, where it took a judgment against Switzerland. And I think it's dangerous when these courts overreach themselves, because ultimately we're going to solve climate change through political will, through legislation in this House and the other place, by the actions we take as politicians, by the arguments we put to the electorate. And so I do think there's a danger of overreach, but the Council of Europe overall is a good thing.
My Lords, the Foreign Secretary mentioned the recent European Court of Human Rights judgment on climate change. Did you have a chance to look at Tim Ike KC's dissenting judgment when he said it was extraneous and went beyond its judicial remit? So further to the Foreign Secretary's reply to the main question, what sort of reform did he have in mind, and what changes can be made to improve the court?
Well, I did look at the dissenting judgment, and I thought it was pretty frank and clear. We have made reforms to the European Court of Human Rights. The noble Lord Clark battled very hard in the coalition government to achieve the Brighton Declaration, which was an improvement. We've made some changes recently on Article 39. So I think there are changes you can make, but I do think it will partly depend on the court's attitude to how far it takes its mission beyond the actual convention rights. And, you know, I'm not an expert on the convention, but I don't think it mentions climate change. And as I said, climate change, or, you know, the rights we have in terms of our health service or education, these are things we should be legislating for in Parliament, accountable politicians to their electorates, rather than depending on a court. So reform is necessary, and reform is going through, but I think there also needs to be a balance here about leaving to nation states those things that they should be deciding themselves.
Europe is the Committee to Prevent Torture, Inhumane Treatment and Degrading Treatment. The Foreign Secretary will be aware that that committee against torture had raised concerns last year concerning UK immigration policy when it comes to the detention of vulnerable people who are seeking asylum, no matter how they get to the UK. The Foreign Secretary's signature is on the Rwanda Treaty, which, enabled by the Rwanda Bill, will mean that a trafficked woman who ends up in the UK, against her knowledge and against her will, through an irregular route, will now be detained and sent to Rwanda under his policy. This is, as the committee said, a reversal of the commitment given by the Prime Minister in 2016 to introduce a clear presumption against detention of vulnerable people. Does the Foreign Secretary not agree with me that on the 75th anniversary of the Council of Europe, we should be strengthening our support for vulnerable trafficked people coming to the UK, rather than to be reneging on the commitments given?
I think what we should be doing is dealing with the problem of very visible illegal migration, which is a problem not just in this country, but a problem all over the world. And to do that, every country has to come up with an answer of what it's going to do. And as I've explained in this dispatch box before, because it's not possible to do immediate returns to France, that's not something that is currently negotiable, that is why we have the Rwanda judgment. I mean, I've been looking at this issue for well over a decade. I remember the Chahal case back in the 1990s, which, you know, where the court it was that determined that you couldn't balance anymore what's the risk to Britain of a dangerous terrorist staying, and what's the risk to that dangerous terrorist if they're deported. There was no balance. The right was absolute. Now, you can argue that's a good thing or it's a bad thing. My argument would be that that's the sort of thing we need to debate and decide in Parliament, rather than simply rely on a court.
Of international organisations. Has the Foreign Secretary had time to reflect on the comments of Liz Truss, who said that she would like to see the United Nations abolished because she claimed she doesn't see a purpose for the organisation? So has he got any message to those of us who can't see a purpose of Liz Truss?
I take the view that the United Nations has many problems and issues, and the frustrations of dealing with the Security Council at the moment, when you've got a Russian veto and a Chinese veto, these frustrations are very great. But nonetheless, it's important we have an international body where issues can be discussed, where countries can come together. Good work is done through the United Nations in spite of the frustrations. So I can see the point of the United Nations.
My Lords,
The Council of Europe has at its heart the enforcement of human rights. And yet, to some of us, the situation in Europe in relation to human rights is sliding backwards. Whether it's Poland, Hungary, Greece, Germany, Spain and Portugal all lurching to the right. One of the worst is Poland. The Council of Europe is a place where Britain and Poland share a forum. Poland is in breach, and has been for decades, of its moral and legal duty to make restitution of property stolen from victims of the Second World War, not to mention Poland's clampdown on the judiciary and the freedom of press and women's rights. Will the Foreign Secretary use the Council of Europe to take Poland to task?
My interpretation of recent political movements in Poland is they rather move back to the centre, having elected Donald Tusk and my counterpart Radek Sikorski. I'll look specifically at the point about restitution because I'm not aware of that specific point, but I make the broader point that one of the reasons why some of these more fringe parties are doing well in Europe, and look at the Portuguese elections, for instance, is because mainstream politicians haven't done enough to demonstrate that immigration is under control, that illegal immigration is cracked down on, and that migration policies are designed in parliaments, by parliaments, for the specific benefits of the countries. Where you see that happen, in Australia, in Canada, they have higher rates of migration than we do, but it's so clear that the policies are designed by those countries, for those countries, they seem to have less of a problem with extremist parties than many countries in Europe.
My Lord, I think I'm right in saying that the only country in the entire continent which has always rejected membership of the Council of Europe and refused to accept the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights is Belarus, which is a cruel dictatorship with no regard for human rights at all. Russia has been expelled. He was a little evasive on the present position of the court, and reform is undoubtedly one thing which can be collectively agreed upon by all the members of the Council of Europe. But can he not just give a simple, categorical assurance on the part of the present government that it will not at any stage contemplate just rejecting membership of the Council of Europe or rejecting the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights, which is the most important international institution, particularly sometimes for the reasons given by the previous questioner?
Let me be clear, the government sees no inconsistency between its policies and our membership of the Council of Europe, and we don't have any plans to act in the way that he says. The point I'm making, I'm being very frank and open with your Lordship's House, is that there are moments of extreme frustration, and he'll remember serving in government with me when the European Court of Human Rights ruled repeatedly that we had to give prisoners the vote. Now, there's nothing in the European Convention that says anything about giving prisoners the vote. To me, it is a decision for democratic parliaments. You can either decide everybody has the vote, irrespective of what crime you've committed, and that's your position. That's not my position. I think if you commit a crime, you go to prison, you lose your right to vote. That is a perfectly reasonable, democratic, dare I say, almost liberal position, which you should be entitled to hold. And so when the court told us we couldn't hold that opinion, we disagreed with vigour. And the point I'm making is these organisations, they are important, they do good work. But if they overreach, they plant the seeds of their own destruction.
My Lords, that concludes the Secretary of State's questions for today.
My Lord, a wee moment just to clear the benches. My Lords, are we ready to kick-start? Okay, so, consideration of Commons reasons on amendment on the safety of Rwanda... Order! My word. They were shouting at me there. Let me just gently start again. Consideration of Commons reasons on amendment on the safety of Rwanda, asylum and immigration bill. Lord Sharp of Epsom.
I beg to move that the Commons reasons and amendment and reasons be now considered.
Commons reasons and amendments be now considered. As men of that opinion will say content. Country not content, the contents have it. Motion A, Lord Stewart of Durfton.
My Lords, I beg to move motion A, that this House do not insist on its amendment 1B, to which the Commons have disagreed for their reason 1C. I will also speak to motion C and C1. Motion A1 relates to Lord's Amendment 1D, which seeks to ensure that the eventual Act has due regard for international law, and the Children Act 1989, Human Rights Act 1998, the Modern Slavery Act 2015. My Lords, as set out on many occasions during the passage of this bill, the Government takes its responsibilities and international obligations seriously. It was said in the other place, extremely seriously, incredibly seriously. And there is nothing in the bill that requires any act or omission that conflicts with our international obligations. Relocating migrants to safe third countries to process their asylum claims is in principle compliant with the UK's obligations under the Refugee Convention, as confirmed by the High Court and the Court of Appeal. It is a model that other countries are also exploring. Furthermore, the bill is predicated on both Rwanda and the United Kingdom's compliance with international law in the form of the treaty, which itself is underpinned by wider international legal obligations by which the United Kingdom and Rwanda are bound. As the Minister for Countering Illegal Migration set out in the other place yesterday, we must bring to an end the dangerous, unnecessary and illegal methods that are being deployed to enter the UK. We must break the people smugglers' business model. We must stop the exploitation of vulnerable people. We must protect our borders. And most importantly, we must save lives at sea. My Lords, our systems are being overwhelmed and our resources stretched. We need to be ambitious in how we tackle this issue, and our partnership with Rwanda provides an opportunity for just such ambition. And this bill provides the legislative means through which we can pursue this policy while having due regard to our domestic and international legal position. However innovative our partnership with Rwanda is, as I reminded the House during the last debate, this is not the first time legislation has been used to determine a country as being a safe country. My Lords, the Government is clear that we assess Rwanda to be a safe country, and we have published detailed evidence that substantiates this assessment. This is a central feature of the bill, and many of its other provisions are designed to ensure that Parliament's conclusion on the safety of Rwanda is accepted by the domestic courts. The bill strikes the appropriate balance of limiting unnecessary challenges that frustrate removal, whilst maintaining the principle of access to the courts where an individual may be at real risk of serious and irreversible harm. This balance creates the strong deterrent that is needed to prevent perilous and unnecessary journeys, whilst also ensuring that we have due regard for our domestic and international laws. Though some of the provisions in the bill are novel, the Government is satisfied that removals to Rwanda will be implemented with due regard to international and domestic law, and it is therefore not necessary to set this out on the face of the bill. The treaty sets out the international legal commitments that the UK and Rwandan governments have made, consistent with their shared standards associated with asylum and refugee protection. Article 10 of the treaty in particular sets out the assurances for the treatment of relocated individuals in Rwanda, including abiding by the Refugee Convention in relation to those seeking asylum, and the enhanced monitoring committee will be in place to monitor robustly adherence to those obligations. Moving on to Lord's Amendment 6D. My Lords, this amendment runs counter to the core purpose of the bill and would eliminate its key provision. The purpose of this bill is to invite Parliament to agree with its assessment that the Supreme Court's concerns have been properly addressed and Rwanda can be deemed a safe country, and to enact the measures in this bill accordingly. This bill reflects that Parliament is sovereign and can change domestic law as it sees fit, including, if it be Parliament's judgment, requiring a state of affairs or facts to be recognised. Rwanda is a signatory to key international agreements, protecting the rights of refugees and those in need of international protection, including the United Nations Convention Against Torture, the Refugee Convention and other core UN human rights conventions. Rwanda's obligations under these international agreements are embedded in its domestic legal provisions. The Rwandan constitution ensures that international agreements which Rwanda has ratified become domestic law in Rwanda. Article 28 of the Rwandan constitution recognises the right of refugees to seek asylum in Rwanda. In light of this, and from the evidence that we have provided, and the commitments made by the United Kingdom and the government of Rwanda in the internationally binding treaty which we have signed, our assessment is that Rwanda is generally a safe country and respects the rule of law. Our view of Rwanda's safety has been further reinforced by the progress being made on the readiness for implementation of the treaty. To make clear, my lords, we will only ratify the treaty once we agree with Rwanda that all necessary implementation is in place for both countries to comply with their obligations under the treaty. Since our last debate on the 20th of March, on Thursday the 21st of March, the Rwandan Senate passed their legislation ratifying the treaty. The domestic legislation to implement the new asylum system has been approved by the Cabinet and is now with Parliament for consideration. The new Rwandan asylum law will strengthen and streamline key aspects of the end-to-end asylum system, in particular decision-making processes and associated appeals processes. A complaints process has been set up and will continue to be developed as we progress with the partnership. This, plus wider assurances around training and process which we have been given, will ensure quality of decision-making and build capability in the government of Rwanda's asylum system, all of which simply reinforces our confidence in Rwanda's commitment to delivering this partnership and Rwanda's status as a safe country. The treaty will ensure that those relocated will be safe and fully supported, will not be removed to another country other than, in very limited circumstances, the UK, will have their asylum claims processed fairly, with access to free legal representation at all stages of the asylum process, and those who are not granted refugee status or humanitarian protection will get equivalent treatment and will be granted permanent residence. Therefore, it is right to ensure relocations to Rwanda are not frustrated and delayed as a result of systemic challenges on its general safety, that the bill's provisions limit challenges on the basis that Rwanda is generally not a safe country, or that there is a risk of individuals being removed from Rwanda to their country of origin or to another country in contravention of Rwanda's obligations under international law, including, in particular, under the...
Lord, I think he's talking about 10.3 in the treaty. He will know what the question I'm going to ask, because this is the fourth time I've asked it. 10.3 in the treaty commits the parties, that's us and Rwanda, to cooperate to agree an effective system for ensuring no refoulement. That system clearly did not exist when the treaty was signed. The signatories of the treaty, rightly, in my view, thought it necessary to create such a system. Has that system been created now, and when will we see it here?
The point is that the treaty will not be ratified until such time as that protection is in place. My Lords, it is right to ensure that relocations are not frustrated as a result of general systemic challenges based on the general safety of Rwanda. The bill's provisions therefore limit challenges on the basis that Rwanda is not generally a safe country, or that there is the prospect of the refoulement to which the noble Lord was referring a moment ago. My Lords, we are satisfied that the bill, Clause 4, protects explicitly access to justice by ensuring that courts can continue to consider the safety of Rwanda for an individual where there is compelling evidence relating specifically to that person's particular individual circumstances, except where the individual circumstances claim relates to refoulement. This underpins the principle that no one should be put in a position where they would face a real risk of harm, and is in line with the United Kingdom's international legal obligations, including under Articles 2, 3 and 13 of the European Convention on Human Rights. My Lords, I therefore cannot accept this amendment. I beg to move.
Question is motion A be agreed to. Motion A1, Lord Coker.
My Lords, I beg to move motion A1 as an amendment to motion A, at end insert, and do propose amendment 1D in lieu. My Lords, I was interested to listen to the Noble Lord's remarks, and I thank him for the introduction. But let me say why we think that this amendment that I've put forward to your Lordships now is still so necessary. The Minister just asserts that domestic law will be obeyed, that international conventions and laws will be obeyed. Your Lordships debated at the last time this was before your Lordship's House at great length some of these domestic and international law issues, dismissed in a sentence by the Minister in the other place, not by the Noble Lord Stewart, but in a sentence, just a statement, an assertion that in a sentence that we do comply with domestic and international law. Nowhere did the Minister in the other place address the fact, and I go back to a point Lord Helsham has made at great length, that the bill explicitly lays out that international law can be disapplied. It states in there that the Act is unaffected by international law, and then lays out all of the various treaties that can be ignored by the government in the pursuit of its Rwanda policy. A policy that disintegrates before its eyes. Hundreds come across in small boats at the weekend. Thousands since the beginning of the year. Where's the government announcement about that? When the figures go down, the government announces it all the time. When the figures go up, there's radio silence from 10 Downing Street about whether the policy is working or not. But I say again to the Minister, in order to be reasonably brief, to get to it simply isn't good enough for a government to assert that domestic and international law will be applied when this Act is passed by assertion. That is why we push this. We want something that persuades us that the government takes this seriously. All it asks is have due regard to. It doesn't say actually any more than that. It's softened significantly to that extent. And I just say, whether it's international law, and I've laid out some examples of the various legislative acts that have been passed by this Parliament, of which we are all proud, the necessity for the government to have due regard to that. But when we come to international obligations, we've just had the Foreign Secretary explain at great length the importance of convention, the importance of international law, the importance of abiding by the things that we've signed up to. And that is why we take action with respect to the Middle East. That is why we take action with respect to what we call the illegal war in Ukraine, quite rightly. That is why we take action with respect to the Houthis in the Red Sea. We take action with respect to all of that because our country proudly stands up for international convention, for international law. It respects those conventions. It expects other countries to respect those conventions. And the whole point of what I'm putting before your Lordship's House is to say, what on earth does it do to the credibility of His Majesty's government when in the international conventions across the globe it stands up and lectures other countries about the importance of adhering to international law, of the importance of adhering to international conventions, when it passes a law which explicitly states that with respect to the Rwanda bill it doesn't have to? Where is the integrity of the government with respect to that. I want His Majesty's government to be able to stand up in all these citadels of the great and the good, meeting together as countries of the world to solve common problems. I said to the Minister, at the Noble Lord, at the last time I spoke, the Prime Minister of Pakistan used the Rwanda bill as a legitimate reason that he could send people back to Afghanistan. He used the British government as an example of the fact that he could ignore international convention. And doesn't it come to something, my lords, when we actually read another problem that we can't go into? The government can't get anybody to fly these refugees, these migrants. They can't persuade anybody. Even the RAF are refusing. I guess if they're ordered to, they would have to. Air Tanker is, we read, the latest airline. But we can't find an airline to fly the migrants back, the thousands that are waiting, queuing up at the airports to go through to do that. But I found one airline that actually decided at great length that it was not going to ruin its brand by flying migrants back to Rwanda. It decided that actually it was actually something that they couldn't bring themselves to do. Isn't it come to something when you read that the Rwanda State Airline rejects the UK proposal to fly asylum seekers to Rwanda because they're worried about the impact it will have on its reputation? Where on earth is the British government taking a cue from Rwanda State Airlines and saying, we know that this will risk the global brand that Britain proudly has across the world, and we'll take a cue from Rwanda State Airlines and we'll say that we want to conform to international law. We want to make sure that we won't be undermined in the courts of the world. And there we have it as an example to us all. Your Lords, my Lords, the amendment before us is simple. It simply asks the government to have due regard to domestic and international law, to have due regard to the acts that this Parliament has passed, to have due regard to the international conventions that we've signed, to have due regard to the law of nations which prevents anarchy in our own country but prevents anarchy across the world. How on earth has it come to it when the great Conservative Party, the party that's always said that we treasure the rule of law, it is something you will always find us standing up for, and has lectured the party to which I belong to for generations about the importance of democracy, human rights and the rule of law, both internally and internationally. It is unbelievable that in dismissing this, as the Minister has just done, along with his colleagues in the other place, in dismissing this with a swish of the hand, something as important as this, just dismissed. We're going to do it. Don't worry about it. We're going to do it. No need for us to explain how on earth that is possible. Just something swept away, something as important as this. I say this amendment should be passed as one more effort to say to our government, be true to the traditions on which the democracy of this country has been based for centuries, and something of which we've all been proud.
The question was that motion A be agreed to, since when motion A1 has been moved as an amendment to motion A. At the end, insert the words printed on the marshalled list. The question, therefore, is that motion A1 be agreed to.
My Lords, it's a pleasure to follow my noble friend, Lord Coker, and my motion C1 very much dovetails with his motion A1, though when, with his support, I seek to test the opinion of the House in a little while, that will be after the debate on the motion B1 in the name of the noble and learned Lord Hope of Craighead, and I very much hope that he will be testing your Lordship's opinions as well. Why my motion dovetails with my noble friends is that we cannot observe even the international rule of law by defenestrating our own domestic courts. And so this amendment has always sought to restore the jurisdiction of His Majesty's judges and their ability to give appropriate scrutiny to these most vital of human rights decisions. Now, the noble and learned Lord, the Minister, was quite right earlier when he said this is not the first time in legislative history that a country has been deemed presumptively safe for refugees and asylum seekers, but there is a world of difference, I suggest, between a country being presumptively safe, and a country being conclusively safe for all time, with no avenue for challenging that safety, even as facts change. Of course.
The Supreme Court, just a few months ago, has held that Rwanda is not safe.
Once more, as always, I am so grateful to the noble Viscount Hailsham, whose father famously coined the phrase elective dictatorship in his Dimbleby lecture of 1976, and that is the fundamental problem with this bill unamended by the new Clause 4. It allows the executive to dictate the facts. It allows the executive to defenestrate domestic courts, not international or some would say foreign courts, domestic courts, including in their ability to grant in extremis interim relief. And so the amendment turns the conclusion for all time that Rwanda's safe into a rebuttable presumption based on credible evidence, and therefore incorporates the earlier work of the noble Lord Anderson of Ipswich. It also incorporates earlier amendments by the noble and learned Lord Etherton and my noble friend Lord Dubbs and my noble friend Lord Cashman, in including a person's membership of a persecuted social group in the examination of whether they would be safe. Not just their most particular individual circumstances, but their membership of a social group, which is probably the basis for most refugee claims in the world. And as I've said, it restores that vital ability in extremis to grant interim relief, but in understanding of some concerns on the benches opposite and of the government, a court or tribunal under this measure, as amended, would have to have heard from the Secretary of State or taken all reasonable steps so to do, and only grant such an injunction where the delay would be for no longer than strictly necessary for the fair and expeditious determination of the case. This does not prevent a policy of transportation to Rwanda, no matter how much I loathe that policy in terms of utility, morality and expense. It is a reasonable compromise that the other place have given no serious respect or attention to, and therefore no serious respect to your Lordship's house.
Yeah. My Lords, I want to extend... Yes. I want to extend my heartfelt sympathy to the benches opposite, because I know there are many people there who are very unhappy about this bill, because it is an absolutely vile bill. And part of that is the fact that the Tory government is actually abusing not just human rights, not just the rule of law, but also democracy itself. And the fact is, you have wasted this House's time over these weeks, many hours, many days, and then taken everything out in the other place. That is an abuse of democracy. What is the point of your Lordship's House if it can simply be ignored by the government? So shame on the government. If you think the public supports this bill, you should call a general election, and I think you'll be unpleasantly surprised that they don't. So general election now, please.
Yeah. My Lords, I draw attention to my interests. I'm supported by the RAMP project. I looked very carefully at the Hansard in the House of Commons about this First Amendment moved by Lord Coker, though it was even looking for some rationale why the government would not accept it. And it was a single sentence. It says, the government said there, we have a long-standing tradition of ensuring that rights and liberties are protected domestically and of fulfilling our international obligations. And on the basis of that sentence, it was rejecting the amendment which this House had passed about seeking to observe national and international law. And if it is the case that that sentence stands on its own, and that's the only reason we're being asked to change our minds, then why and what dangers or exposures or difficulties does the government believe that this amendment, which is more restrictive than the last one even, and more tightly specified, stands in the way of the government in anything that it wishes to do, and just why it can't simply accept it? And if the concern is the ECHR, then I'm sure the government will have seen that the threshold of granting interim injunctions has been considerably raised to a level described by former Justice Secretary Robert Buckland last night as vanishingly small or non-existent. So why doesn't the government accept this amendment? We will certainly support it, and also the other amendment, which of course does the other job, which is in part of the problem which people have seen with this bill, which is to change the balance that we have in our country between our judiciary and the executive. And that balance is the one which, of course, that we're trying to maintain, even in the very, very limited circumstances. It doesn't take away from our belief on these benches that this bill is entirely wrong, and that it is cruel, it's inhumane, and that it won't work, which is clearly demonstrated, I think, by the numbers we've seen so far. But it seems to us that the government has no rationale and has given no rationale for refusing these amendments.
My Lords, I welcome Lord Coker's amendment, and in particular the detail of the inclusion of the Modern Slavery Act 2015 in it. It's a detail except for those who have been or may well have been trafficked. There are as many as 4,000 people in the National Referral Mechanism whose case is currently to be determined. And that is absolutely right and proper under current legislation. And that legislation should be taken into account as part of the implementation of the Safety of Rwanda Bill. But the Modern Slavery Act is a world-beating piece of legislation which we disregard at our peril. And yet it is, in its many changes in other legislation, being undermined. And in this case, not only will there be a negative impact on victim care, but significant law enforcement issues with not paying due regard to the Act, not identifying victims or sending them to another country before their claim has been properly assessed, will set back our efforts to bring perpetrators of modern slavery to justice. Victims are often the only witnesses to this crime, and perpetrators will therefore be more likely to escape detection and conviction. Now, the amendment which the government has brought forward on a report on modern slavery to be made to Parliament is a concession which I hope will make it easier for members of both houses to scrutinise the effects of this legislation on some of the most marginalised people in our society. However, I don't think that it goes far enough. There must be a general exemption for people who are suspected of or confirmed victims of modern slavery. This should be the very least we can do for survivors of a terrible crime. I am grateful for Lord Coker's amendment.
My Lords, I'm grateful for those contributions made by noble lords in relation to the bill. And I have no doubt but that they are inspired by appropriate feelings of concern for people caught up in, as the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Bristol, mentioned to us a moment ago, the disgraceful practice of modern slavery. But, my Lords, nonetheless, these amendments are not necessary. And the point is that they, in particular in relation to the noble Lady Baroness Chakrabarty's amendment, the point is that they undermine the fundamental purpose of the bill, which is to invite Parliament to agree with its assessment that the Supreme Court's concerns have been properly addressed and to enact the measures in this bill accordingly. Each of the measures in the bill as originally drafted, are necessary to enable us to create a deterrent that will stop the boats. That deterrent will work only when there is an end to the cycle of spurious legal challenges which seek to do nothing more than to frustrate removal and prevent us from having control of who can stay in the United Kingdom. My Lord's, opening for the opposition front bench, Lord Coker deplored a series of steps in the bill which he says undermines domestic and international law. My Lords, the measures to which the noble Lord referred are entirely consistent with the status of a sovereign parliament. The bill reflects that Parliament is sovereign and can change domestic law as it sees fit, including, if that be its judgment, requiring a state of affairs or facts to be recognised. The principle that Parliament should be able to address any determination by the courts of incompatibility, rather than having primary legislation being quashed by the courts, is part of the fundamental basis of parliamentary sovereignty. My Lords, the example which the noble Lord put forward, citation by a head of state or a prime minister in a different country, is of course an example of precisely that refoulement which is forbidden in terms of the treaty. The noble lady Baroness Chakrabarti, in moving her motion, said that the handling of the point of your Lordship's amendment in the other place showed the other place to be guilty of a serious lack of respect to your Lordship's house. I think, my Lords, what we could say instead is that it demonstrates that the other place identified that the noble lady's amendment, however well-intentioned, cuts straight to the heart of the policy which the government has set out. That, I think, addresses the points made respectively by the noble lady Baroness Jones of Molescombe and by the noble Lord German, to whom I would say that there are, as we set forth in earlier stages of this bill, examples across the world of where a similar approach has been successful and has now gained approval across most of the political spectrum. My noble friend Lord Hailsham, Viscount Hailsham, said that the Supreme Court held that Rwanda is not a safe country. My Lords, that is not the case. That is not what the judgment said. And in any event, the Supreme Court's assessment was based on a situation long since superseded, as your Lordships will hear in more detail by my noble friend Lord Sharp of Epsom later on.
In answer to my learned friend Lord Kerr of Kinlochhead's question, you said the bill is not going to be brought into force until the government is satisfied that Rwanda is safe. And what Lord Kerr was referring to is the network of agreements that require people to ensure refoulement. Could the noble minister describe to the House and to the country what is the process the government is going to use in order to determine that Rwanda is a safe country? Because obviously the noble minister is accepting it is not a safe country at the moment because the refoulement arrangements are not in place. And indeed, the last time we were here, he told us there was a bill going through the Rwandan parliament, or its equivalent, that was not yet through. So how will the government know? Because the government is saying they're going to decide. How will they know, and what is their process?
My Lords, if I referred at an earlier stage to the bill as opposed to the treaty, I do apologise to your Lordship's House. The treaty will not be ratified until such time. I'm grateful to the noble Lord. As to the measures to which he refers, anent the adoption by the Rwandan government of measures, I think I touched upon that in my speech, and in any event, my noble friend, Lord Sharp of Epsom, in treating with later amendments, will go back over in detail on those measures being carried out by Rwanda. In relation to the interaction between our state, His Majesty's government, and their state, again, the House will hear later about the operation of the monitoring committee and the other bilateral bodies established to check on the ongoing safety of persons relocated to Rwanda.
This, but the noble minister is saying the government is going to make a judgment. Tell us how the government is going to make that judgment?
My Lords, by the implementation of these steps by the government of Rwanda and the establishment of the very processes to which I've referred your Lordships. My Lords, it is not right or fair to allow our asylum and legal systems to be misused in the way in which they are being misused. The public rightly expects us to remove those who have entered illegally and do not have a right to be here. And this bill, which forms part of a wider programme to assess rising numbers in illegal migration, will enable us to deliver on that priority. To the point raised by the Noble Lord Coker earlier, I spoke from this dispatch box in some detail, as did my noble friend Lord Sharp of Epsom, in relation to the interdiction of criminal operations elsewhere in the world, the seizure of engines, the seizure of equipment, the increased cooperation with the criminal authorities in France and elsewhere. My Lords, the country is entitled to expect of its Parliament that it takes urgent steps to address the problems which have concerned us during the passage of this bill. The other place has now considered and rejected amendments similar to these on several occasions. It is time to restore the original Clause 1 to the bill with its clear statement of purpose. And it is time, my Lords, I respectfully submit, to respect the clearly expressed view of the elected House by endorsing motion A. My Lords, I beg to move.
My Lords, can I thank the Minister for that reply, but it doesn't satisfy me. I wish to test the opinion in the House. I beg to move.
My Lords, the question is that motion A1 be agreed to. This means that opinion will say content.
Content.
Probably not content.
Not content.
We will settle this by a division. I will advise the House when the voting is open. That's very quick. Voting is now open. Clear the bar. My Lords, sorry to interrupt your queuing, I'm afraid. The question is that motion A1 be agreed to. As many as that opinion will say content. Content. The contrary not content. Not content. The contents will go to the right to the throne. The contents will go to the right by the throne, and not contents to the left by the bar. My Lords, the question is that motion A1 be agreed to. My Lords, the question was that motion A1 be agreed to. There have voted content 258, not content 233. Therefore, the contents have it. My Lords, shall we just move on swiftly? That will bring us to motion B. Lord Sharp of Epsom.
My Lords, I beg to move motion B that this House do not insist on its amendment 3B and 3C, to which the Commons have disagreed for their reason 3D. I will also speak to motions D, D1, E, F and F1. My Lords, at this late stage in the bill's passage through both houses, it has been made unequivocally clear here and in the other place that it remains the government's priority to stop the boats. As I've stated before, the deterrent will only work if we apply the same rules to everyone. We need to take swift action now to put in place the policy that will enable relocations to Rwanda to take place, to create that deterrent to stop the boats. We have seen the deterrence effect work for Albania, and we need to replicate that for everyone else. My Lords, turning to motion B, Amendment 3E. We've made it clear the government will only ratify the treaty in the UK once we agree with Rwanda that all necessary implementation is in place for both countries to comply with the obligations under the treaty. Clause 9 of the bill clearly sets out the bill provisions come into force when the treaty enters into force, and the treaty enters into force when the parties have completed their internal procedures. Furthermore, the government maintains periodical and ad hoc reviews of country situations, including Rwanda, and this will not change. The published country information notes include information from a wide range of sources such as media outlets, local, national and international organisations, the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. The treaty also sets out clearly in Article 4.1 that it is for the UK to determine the timing of a request for relocation of individuals under the terms of the agreement and the number of such requests made. This means that the government would not be obligated to remove individuals under the terms of the treaty if there had been, for example, an unexpected change to the in-country situation in Rwanda that required further considerations. My Lords, the government of Rwanda's commitment to the partnership and their obligations under the treaty has been demonstrated by the progress they're making towards implementation. The recent steps that have been taken, as set out by my noble friend Lord Stewart in the last group, are on the Thursday, the March the 21st, the Rwandan Senate passed the legislation ratifying the treaty. The domestic legislation to implement the new asylum system has been approved by the Cabinet and is now with Parliament for consideration. And a complaints process has been set up and will be further developed as we progress further into the partnership. Turning to motion D1, Amendment 7D. This amendment would result in the provisions of Section 57 of the 2023 Act only applying to decisions on age made by a designated person or local authorities under Section 53B of the 2022 Act, where the removal is to Rwanda, and would prevent Section 57 of the 2023 Act from applying to decisions on age taken by the other listed decision makers in subsection 6 of the Section 57, where the removal is to Rwanda. For example, initial age decisions of immigration officers at the border. The initial decision on age is an important first step to prevent individuals who are clearly an adult or a child from being subjected unnecessarily to a more substantive age assessment. As part of this process, upon arrivals, individuals will only be treated as an adult, where two immigration officers assess that their physical appearance and demeanour very strongly suggests they are significantly over 18. This is a deliberately high threshold, and the principle of the benefit of the doubt means that where there is doubt, an individual will be treated as a child pending further observation by a local authority, usually in the form of a Merton-compliant age assessment. This approach has been confirmed by the Supreme Court in the landmark case Supreme Court in BF Eritrea versus the Secretary of State for the Home Department 2021, UK Supreme Court 38. We know assessing age is difficult, but it is important that the government takes decisive action to deter adults from knowingly claiming to be children. Unaccompanied children will be treated differently to adults under the 2023 Act, and there are obvious safeguarding risks of adults being placed within the care system. It is therefore crucial that we take steps to safeguard and swiftly identify genuine children and avoid that lengthy legal challenges to age decisions prevent the removal of those who have been assessed to be adults. This amendment will simply open the floodgates for more abuse within the system and encourage adults to knowingly claim to be children to avoid being relocated to Rwanda, placing genuine children at risk and being disadvantaged. Furthermore, this new amendment will give rise to a differential treatment. The amendment results in Section 57 of the 2023 Act applying only to decisions by local authorities and the National Age Assessment Board if the person is to be removed to Rwanda. This would result in treating differently those who are to be removed to Rwanda under the 2023 Act to those removed to another country under the 2023 Act. Decisions of immigration officers and the other listed decision makers in subsection 6 of Section 57 would therefore not fall within Section 57 if removal is to Rwanda, and so judicial reviews to these decisions could be suspensive appeal rights would apply, and the judicial review could be heard on a matter-of-fact basis, and there is simply no justification for this differential treatment. Turning to motion E and Amendment 9. As I've previously set out, under the internationally binding treaty, the Government of Rwanda will have regard to information provided by the UK relating to any special needs an individual may have that may arise as a result of them being a victim of modern slavery and human trafficking. Rwanda will take all the necessary steps to ensure those needs are accommodated. Safeguarding arrangements are set out in detail in the standard operating procedures on identifying and safeguarding vulnerability, dated May 2023, which states that at any stage in the refugee status determination and integration process, officials may encounter and should have due regard to the physical and psychological signs that can indicate a person is vulnerable. The standard operating procedure sets out the process for identifying vulnerable persons and, where appropriate, making safeguarding referrals to the relevant protection team. Screening interviews to identify vulnerabilities will be conducted by protection officers who've received the relevant training and are equipped to competently handle safeguarding referrals. The protection team may trigger follow-up assessments and/or treatment as appropriate. In addition, protection officers may support an individual to engage in the asylum process and advise relevant officials of any support needs or adjustments to enable the individual to engage with the process. My Lords, victims of human trafficking and human slavery will receive the necessary support they need in Rwanda, as they would in the UK. The Government of Rwanda has systems in place to safeguard relocated individuals with a range of vulnerabilities, including those concerning mental health and gender-based violence. To that end, the Government Amendment in lieu, Amendment 9C. This requires the Secretary of State to publish an annual report about the operation of this legislation as it relates to the modern slavery and human trafficking provisions in Article 13 of the treaty. Turning to Motion F, Amendment 10D.
Can the Minister explain to the House how far the scope of this annual report will go beyond what the Monitoring Committee will be doing, so that both the Government and Parliament are able to scrutinise exactly what is going on?
I'm afraid I don't know how far it will differ or not, as the case may be, from the Monitoring Committee, so I'll have to write to the noble lady on that particular subject, I'm afraid.
Apologise for interrupting. Could the Minister confirm that before the Government is satisfied that Rwanda is a safe country, they will seek the views of the Monitoring Committee?
Well, my Lords, we've discussed and my noble friend, noble and learned friend, discussed this recently in the last group, just precisely what the position is when it comes to how the government will be made aware of whether or not treaties should be ratified and so on. That is also dealt with in considerable detail, as we have rehearsed from the dispatch box on a number of occasions in the agreement that was published in January this year, I believe starting at paragraph 101. I won't go through it all again. My Lords, turning to Motion F, Amendment 10D, as we have set out before, the Government recognises the commitment and responsibility that comes with combat veterans, whether our own or those who showed courage by serving alongside us, and we will not let them down. So once again, I want to reassure Parliament that once the UKSF ARAP review has concluded, the Government will consider and revisit how the Illegal Migration Act and removal under existing immigration legislation will apply to those who are determined ARAP eligible as a result of the review, ensuring that those people receive the attention that they deserve. For now, my Lords, I beg to move.
The question is that Motion B be agreed to. Motion B1, Lord Hope of Craighead.
Lords, I beg to move Motion B1 as an amendment to Motion B, that at the end there be inserted the words, and do propose Amendment 3E as an amendment in lieu of Amendment 3C. Lords, I asked for this amendment in lieu to be put down because I believe that Lord's Amendment 3C, to which I propose Amendment 3E in lieu, raised important issues to which further thought still needs to be given by the other place. So it is my intention, if I do not receive a satisfactory reply, to test the opinion of the House on this amendment. Lord, my amendment, as now phrased, seeks to add two provisions to Clause 1 of the Bill. That clause states, as we know, that the Act gives effect to the judgment of Parliament that the Republic of Rwanda is a safe country. In other words, that it is a country from which persons who are sent there will not be removed or sent to another country in contravention of any international law, and further, that their claims for asylum will be determined and treated in accordance with that country's obligations under international law as well. As the noble and learned Lord Stewart of Durton said earlier in the earlier group, that provision is central to the entire provisions in the bill. It's a crucial provision on which so much else depends. Now, the Lords, the Act will come into force on the day in which the Rwanda Treaty enters into force. And that means that your Lordships are being asked to say, as a matter of judgment, that as from that very moment and without more, Rwanda is a safe country. I do not believe that despite the assurances given by the noble ministers, that your Lordships have been told enough to enable that judgment to be made. Moreover, as the bill stands, the assumption seems to be that Rwanda will continue to be safe forevermore, forever after, come what may. That is because the decision makers referred to in Clause 2 are under an obligation to make the assumption conclusively that Rwanda is a safe country without any qualification whatever as to what may happen in the future. Surprisingly, no provision is made anywhere in this bill for what should happen if the facts change and everyone can see that Rwanda is no longer safe. Now, my Lords, I want to make it clear, as I made clear last time, that I do not for a moment question the good faith of the government of Rwanda when it entered into the agreement which is enshrined in the treaty, nor in the carrying forward of the obligations which it contains. And I don't question its determination to do everything that it can to make the treaty work as it is intended to do. That's what my amendment is about. My first point is that before Rwanda can be judged to be a safe country, the mechanisms in the treaty that provide for this must be put into practice. Ratifying the treaty is an important step, but it's not enough. It must be implemented before Rwanda can considered to be safe. Now, under sustained cross-examination by the noble Lord Falcon of Throwerton, questions have been asked repeatedly as to what actually is going on in Rwanda. And the Minister, Lord Sharp, noble Lord Sharp, used the words progress is being made. Further developments are taking place. But, Lords, that's not good enough. And the assurances that we're given in themselves are not enough for us to make the judgment we're required to make. That is why I'm asking that Rwanda be not treated as a safe country until the Secretary of State has laid before Parliament a statement from the Independent Monitoring Committee that the key mechanisms that the treaty provides for its implementation have been created. Now, Lords, the Monitoring Committee exists. Communications have been taking place between the government and that committee. I can't see that my amendment is placing any difficulty in the place of the government if the government's assurances to us are soundly based. And it is very strange, and I simply raise this as a question for your Lordships to consider. I've been asking for this amendment for some time now. The government know perfectly well what my point is, and yet we've still not had a statement from the Monitoring Committee that the treaty is being implemented. And that raises a serious issue as to where we really do stand on this crucial issue. Now, my second point is that there must be some way, surely, of dealing with the situation without resorting to primary legislation if, for whatever reason, Rwanda is no longer safe because the provisions of a treaty are no longer being adhered to in practice. Anything may happen in the future. We can't be sure what is going to happen 3 years, 5 years, 10 years on from now. So my amendment provides that Rwanda will cease to be a safe country for the purposes of the Act if the Secretary of State, on the advice of the Monitoring Committee, makes a statement to Parliament to that effect. Now, where that will lead to, that's for the government to work out if they accept my amendment. But the extraordinary thing is, without that amendment, there is no way of curing the problem without primary legislation, with all the complications that gives rise to. And what I'm seeking the government to face up to is get some mechanism in so that the matter can be dealt with without resorting to primary legislation. Now, Lords, when my original amendments were being considered in the other place before Easter, they did receive support from 3 very experienced lawyers speaking from the Conservative benches. These were Sir Jeremy Wright, Sir Bob Neal, and Sir Robert Buckland. And they directed their remarks specifically to my second point. Sir Bob Neal said, and I quote, "If facts change and Parliament sets itself up as an arbiter and decider on fact, it must have a means of changing its decision if facts change. Can we find a way forward?" he said. Sir Jeremy Wright said, "It simply is not sensible for Parliament not to be able to say differently, save through primary legislation, if the facts were to change. The government should give some thought to the situation under the bill. It must be right for Parliament to retain the capacity to reconsider and, if necessary, to revise it." And then Sir Robert Buckland, "There is force in their lordships pursuing the point so that we can match up the reality with what we want to achieve legally." Indeed, when my revised amendments were being debated yesterday, Sir Robert Buckland again said that he still commended my amendments, and I'm grateful to him for understanding what I'm asking for and supporting them. My Lords, the Commons' reason, which is set out in the marshalled list, states that my amendments were not necessary. One, because the bill comes into force when the treaty comes into force, and two, that it is not appropriate to legislate for Rwanda adhering to its treaty obligations because its ongoing adherence to its treaty obligations will be subject to the monitoring provisions set out in the treaty. But, my Lords, that reason really fails to face up to the points that I'm making on both of the issues that I raise. The coming into force of the treaty is not enough, despite its ratification. We need confirmation before Parliament that it has been implemented before Rwanda can consider to be safe. And as for the second point, as Sir Jeremy Wright said, it simply is not sensible for Parliament not to be able to say differently, save through primary legislation, if the facts were to change. My Lords, the other place does need to think again. I beg to move.
The original question was that motion B be agreed to. Since when motion B1 has been moved as an amendment to motion B. At end, insert the words as printed on the marshalled list. The question, therefore, is that motion B1 be agreed to.
My Lords, I rise briefly to support B1, moved by the noble and learned lords. I actually support both subsections within his amendment, subsection 7 and subsection 8. But I would like to focus exclusively on subsection 8, because this does address directly what will happen in the foreseeable circumstances that Rwanda ceases to be safe. It lives in a fragile and volatile part of the world. It doesn't have a long tradition of democracy. The president has been there for an awful long time, and I don't regard that as a good sign. So there is a foreseeable risk that Rwanda will cease to be safe. And as the noble and learned lord says, this bill doesn't just not address that point. It requires future decision makers to assume it is safe when the rest of the world knows that it is unsafe. Now that is a nonsense. It is unjust and it is bad government. And I'm glad to say that there were distinguished voices on the Conservative benches yesterday, and when it was last debated, cited by the noble and learned lord, who made these points. And I recall also the intervention of the noble and learned Lord Falconer, when the matter was debated in this House a few weeks ago, because he told your lordships that that very morning he had heard the Lord Chancellor, Mr. Chalk, say that in the event of the monitoring committee holding that Rwanda was no longer safe, there would be a parliamentary occasion. He didn't specify whether the occasion would be a social one, to which we would or would not be invited, nor did he tell us about the parliamentary process. And I asked the noble lord, the minister, if he would be good enough to tell us what the parliamentary occasion would be. Now, I just finished, and then, of course, I'll give way. And the noble minister, my noble friend, said that he couldn't tell us. Well, he's now had 4 weeks to find out. I give way.
I apologise for intervening, but I haven't heard either from the Lord Chancellor as to what the parliamentary occasion is. Can the noble Lord Hailsham help us? Have you heard what the parliamentary occasion is?
I've been speculating whether we are going to be asked to a party to which we might or might not be invited, whether there would be a parliamentary statement, whether the government would bring forward a bill to repeal this bill. There are a number of possibilities, but we haven't been told. And so far as I'm aware, the Minister hasn't been told either, though he could go and take advice from the box if he so chose, because he's got officials in this chamber who could doubtless advise him. So we do have a real problem, and it is addressed by the amendment made by the learned and noble Lord. And it has advantages, this amendment. It doesn't deny parliamentary sovereignty. It retains the accountability of the Secretary of State. It has one disadvantage in that it is silent as to what happens if the Secretary of State makes a statement to the effect that it's not a safe country. I'm not quite sure what happens in legal terms at that point. But I'm certain of this one thing, that it is an important step forward. We will be making progress if we accepted this amendment. And if the noble and learned Lord tests the opinion of the House, I shall be supporting him.
My Lords, perhaps I might just respond to the noble and learned Viscount. The provision, subclause 8, simply states that if the Secretary of State makes a statement to Parliament, then Rwanda will not be safe for the purposes of the bill. I think that's as far as one can go, but if there's anything wrong with it, it's up to the government to sort it out.
I rise to speak to motion D1. In the last round of ping-pong, my noble friend Lady Chakrabarti described her amendment in lieu as an olive branch. Well, this amendment is more of an olive tree. Such as a compromise it represents on the original amendment passed by your Lordship's House. In the case of an age-disputed child, it would require a proper Merton-compliant age assessment to be made, either by the local authority or the National Age Assessment Board, before they could be removed to Rwanda. If this assessment decided that the person was an adult, they would then be removed. In response to the previous amendment in lieu, the noble Lord the Minister made much of the role of the board, spelling out in detail why it should be involved in any age assessment. The present amendment takes on board what he said and includes the board as one of two possible safeguards to prevent a child erroneously being sent to Rwanda. As such, it is helping to ensure that the government's own intention that no unaccompanied child should be removed to Rwanda is fulfilled. The Minister emphasised this, reading out the treaty's clear statement to this effect. And he stated that if an age-disputed individual requires a Merton assessment, they will be relocated to Rwanda only if determined to be an adult after that Merton assessment. The problem is, my Lords, that under the current provisions, it's all too likely that an age-disputed child will be sent to Rwanda without any possibility of a Merton assessment, so that the Age Assessment Board will be redundant. As it stands, the bill allows for the decision to be made by immigration officers on the basis of a quick visual assessment to be made of physical appearance and demeanour acknowledged to be unreliable by the Home Office, not a high threshold, as the noble Lord claimed it to be. The Refugee and Migrant Children's Consortium warns that we continually see immigration officers deciding a child is an adult on arrival and placing that child in the adult system. It's only after that age decision is challenged and a further determination is made that the child is correctly assessed to be a child. This is the same practice that the Minister repeatedly says will act as a safeguard against wrongful assessment and removal. My Lords, I dealt with the other arguments put forward by the Minister at the previous stage. The key issue facing us today is whether we are prepared to ensure a genuine safeguard against a child being removed to Rwanda because of the failure to provide a proper holistic social work-led age assessment as accurate as is possible. Given that it's government policy that no unaccompanied child should be removed, and given the further concession it represents, I had hoped the Minister might have been able to accept the amendment. As he refuses this olive branch or olive tree, would he at least be willing to give an assurance on the record that no age-disputed child will be sent to Rwanda on the basis of an initial age assessment of appearance and demeanour alone? Or accept his colleague David Simmons MP's urging of the Minister yesterday that the decision is made on the basis of, I quote, a Merton-compliant age assessment that is the gold standard for determining whether a young person is an adult or, I would add, a child. This would provide a helpful basis for the meeting that he kindly agreed to at report stage. I think it would be really helpful if we, peers who signed the original amendments and key stakeholders on the ground, could sit down with the Minister and officials in a less polarised and contested space to discuss how current safeguards could be strengthened by non-legislative means so as to minimise the risk of a child wrongly being sent to Rwanda or anywhere else, a goal which we all share.
Yeah.
Since the Noble Lord the Minister spoke about motion E, I should like to respond to the government amendment. I'm co-chair of the parliamentary group on modern slavery, and I'm a vice-chairman of the Human Trafficking Foundation. I have to say that the government amendment to the modern slavery or human trafficking is, in my view, entirely inadequate to deal with a group of people who are victims of a crime, suffering very often serious trauma, and without control of their destiny. They arrive here without the choice to be here. So they are a specific and completely different group from any other group with which your lordships have been considering. They are then sent to Rwanda or to another country. This government, and I praised it at the time, passed a brilliant piece of legislation, the Modern Slavery Act, admired across the world. It has been made, if I may say so, almost entirely without any effect by subsequent legislation. And for the government to rely on the Modern Slavery Act as the piece of legislation which is taken account of is, it seems to me, laughable. It is equally laughable for the idea that the government makes that the Modern Slavery Act provides a protection for those victims who are covered by the existing legislation. I didn't put down, again, the amendment which I put at the first ping-pong, but I do, and I have to say this, deplore the government's approach to victims of a heinous crime and a really widespread across this country.
My Lords, I rise to speak to Motion F1 and Amendment 10D in lieu. Your Lordship's House will be pleased to hear that I don't intend to rehearse the moral case for this amendment in any detail. Frankly, if I haven't persuaded the House of that in any of the previous occasions I've spoken to a variant of this amendment, then I'll not do it today. Instead, I shall focus, but briefly, on yesterday's proceedings in the other place and the reasoning of the Minister and others in refusing to accept it in its earlier version, Amendment 10C. First, I must dispute any suggestion that mine, in any of its versions, is a wrecking amendment. Indeed, I would argue that far from being a wrecking amendment, it is calculated to improve this legislation in a very specific way, and in so doing to protect our international reputation and our credibility as an ally in future conflicts while leaving the central policy entirely unchallenged, although I don't agree with the central policy. Indeed, or support it. Indeed, I should like to take this opportunity to express my thanks to to 13 senior military and security figures, many of whom are noble members of your Lordship's House, for their letter in support of Amendment 10C, which was published in the Sunday Telegraph on Sunday past. As they said in their letter, without this amendment, the legislation we are considering will do grave damage to our ability to recruit local allies in future military operations. I should be grateful if the noble Lord the Minister in his response would explain why several noble and gallant members of this House, former Chiefs of the Defence Staff and others with direct senior experience in national security issues are wrong in that assessment and that his government is right. If the government simply feels that our credibility as an ally in the future is less important than some other consideration, perhaps he could just say so openly. My Lords, ours is a revising chamber, and that is what we are here to do. Given already we have seen objective reality defined by governmental fiat in relation to Rwanda, I'm less surprised than I otherwise might have been by the government's determination to construe Amendment 10C, which after all, as I've explained before, affects only a small number of people who have given service to this country when we have asked it of them, as in some way disruptive or hostile. It is neither. It is a measured, limited and proportionate amendment calculated to achieve justice for a relatively small number of people who have risked death and injury at our behest and in our interests. As I've explained before, in many cases it's been our own bureaucratic sclerosis, administrative shortcomings and wrongful refusal of the status that would have awarded visas to these very people, enabling them to escape certain death, that compelled these brave men to take irregular routes here in the first place. To then use the fact of their irregular arrival, the need for which is a consequence of our very own failure, as a justification for the removal to Rwanda is not merely illogical, but disgraceful and immoral. The government has offered two principal lines of argument in refusing to accept the principle of exempting this group from deportation. Firstly, they argue that the deterrent value of the Rwanda policy requires absolute consistency, no statutory exemptions from deportation, however deserving. But in response to Conservative backbench voices outlining support for the principles underlying my amendment, the Minister for Countering Illegal Migration argued that it was unnecessary given that the Home Secretary, no other, has discretionary powers under Section 4 of the Legal Migration Act to exempt individuals in certain circumstances. Justifying the refusal of my amendment, this amendment, by arguing simultaneously that clemency hypothetically may be exercised and the deterrent effect must be adamantine, is completely incoherent. My Lords, government has had over a year's notice on this issue and the identity of some of the people that are affected by the amendment, with the Times, the Independent, Sky and Lighthouse reporters all exposing the failures of our approach to the people affected. If they wish to offer certainty and comfort to these people, they have had ample time so to do. What faith can possibly be expected to repose in the government's possible future gratitude to these brave men, given the way they have been treated to date? Of course, I welcome the relocations and assistance policy review, but why not simply accept the moral case, add this amendment to the bill, and relieve this and any future Home Secretary from the burden of exercising discretionary powers by enshrining this exemption into law? Inadequate, my Lords, as the noble and learned Lady Butler-Sloss claims it is, the government's new amendment on modern slavery reporting undermines their own contention that this bill must be passed unamended to preserve its deterrent effect. In making this concession, also, they have, albeit tacitly, conceded the value of this House's scrutiny. I therefore propose both to test the opinion of this House once again and to ask the other place to consider whether it is really in our moral or national interests to expose those brave men who have served with us to further uncertainty. I continue to believe, and all through the time I've been advancing this amendment, I believe that it is now the time to give them the sanctuary their bravery has earned.
My Lords, I rise to make one point in support of Amendment F1. I yield to no one in my commitment to the democratic legitimacy of the House of Commons, but this House does have a constitutional role to play, and this bill is an example of it. We have a constitutional right and duty to make amendments to a bill, even a bad bill like this bill, which was in no manifesto, in order to try and improve it. And the noble lord who has just moved his amendment referred to yesterday's debate, and I rise only to say this one thing, and I'm going to read one sentence made in that debate yesterday, and I quote, "My abiding concern remains for a class of people who served our country, who endured great danger in Afghanistan, who still find themselves in danger in a third country, namely Pakistan, who may well fall foul of an entirely unintended consequence as a result of this legislation, however well-intentioned it may be." Now, that was said by the distinguished government member, Sir Robert Buckland, and if we vote in support of Amendment 1, we can give other members in the other place more of an opportunity to think again and make this improving amendment to the bill.
My Lords, it was interesting to hear the statement last night from the Minister in the other place that in Amendment, what we were discussing today, 3E, First Amendment we're discussing in this section, we had confused the arrangements between what the treaty required and what the bill required. But at the same time, of course, what we were absolutely clear about, and this House was absolutely clear, is that the bill and the treaty are in lockstep. They're locked together not only by paragraph 1 brackets 2 of the bill, but they were also bracketed, they were also claimed additionally in what was a different statement from the Minister, that this international binding treaty show that Rwanda is a safe country and enable the bill to deem Rwanda a safe country. So that's quite clear that both the treaty and the bill are in lockstep. And therefore, what we do and say about the treaty is that's just as much important because the bill will flow from it. Now, this House has already made a determination on the treaty. It said, this House has said, by a vote of this House, that Rwanda is not safe unless certain conditions are met. And the government has already told us that they are, brackets, working towards the implementation of the issues required to make the treaty operational. Yet, under sustained questioning from many members of this House, we have not been able to identify exactly where those issues are and who has put them forward and where, at what point they are operational. And given that this House, particularly, it's in the bill, Parliament, that's us, this House as well, has to declare that Parliament is, that Rwanda is safe as a result of the treaty, then clearly we must be satisfied that the treaty is operational in the way that has been described to us. And that's why Amendment 3E by the Noble and Learned Lord Hope is so important. And among the issues which we now know have yet to be resolved are those which are about training, about the implementation of appropriate systems, and I venture to say what system there is about refoulement, because we then have heard no answers to those questions, and there have been many more from other members here in the course of this bill. So the amendment from the Noble Lord, Learned Lord Hope will provide Parliament, this House, with a mechanism for ensuring that these conditions for ensuring Rwanda is safe are indeed in place. And that is all that this amendment on the first part states, that we now need to know that the conditions which this House has determined by its vote on the treaty are in place in order that the proceedings of the treaty and the bill can move forward. and I therefore would encourage all members of the House to support the Noble Lord's amendments. On the other amendments that we talk about in this bill, clearly we give them great support. But I must say, it's almost like a thorn in the side, really. And the amendment that is required about Afghan supporters is just amazing to me, that the government cannot find a way of giving action to this amendment. The government has made no concrete proposal other than looking at this matter sometime in the future, or by some form of a special treatment by a Secretary of State. Surely, my lords, the moral imperative here is to help those who've helped us. Yes. Letting them down will not help us in the slightest when we might have need of support in other areas of the world. I would encourage people to support this amendment too.
Just very briefly, to support the noble Lord Brown's amendment. This has been worrying many of us for a long time, and I'm one of the signatories to the letter to which he referred. I think there's just one additional point which has been made before, but I think is worth bearing in mind, and that is what the impact would be on individuals whose support we'd need in some future occasion if they felt that they would not be treated as well as they should be treated, and as well we have intended to treat those who've already taken part in helping our armed forces on operations.
My Lords, again I rise briefly just to say how much I support the remarks made by Baroness Butler-Sloss with respect to slavery, and the comments by my noble friend Baroness Lister with respect to children. We will also support, or will support, Lord Hope should he put his amendment to test the opinion of the House, as we think it's a very sensible amendment which simply seeks reports which actually say the things that are required to be implemented have been implemented. And one only has to look to the International Arrangements Committee report where it lists out 10 things in particular that it feels should be implemented before you can say Rwanda is safe. But as the Noble Lord has pointed out to the Noble Lord, Lord Sharp, there's no answer from the government of this other than vague platitudes as to progress being made and steps being taken to ensure that these things will happen rather than they have happened. And similarly, we support the point that Lord Hope has made with the second part of that amendment to actually reflect on what happens in the future should, for whatever reason, changes happen in the environment with respect to Rwanda, political or whatever, which would require Parliament to reconsider its original decision that it was safe. So we very much support the amendment that Lord Hope has put before us. Can I just say a little bit on, and congratulate my noble friend Lord Brown for bringing forward his amendments, and to say how much we support that. I think the case made, as my noble friend pointed out in the Sunday Telegraph, with 13 military and diplomatic leaders who put forward the case for exempting those who've served this country from the provisions of the Rwanda Act, as it will become, I think is something which we as a country should embrace without any debate or controversy at all. I just say that because I think what is important with respect to Lord Brown's amendment is that we support it, but also that the size of the majority is such that the other place is forced to reconsider the bland statement that it made. Don't worry, we'll revisit this at the end of the deliberations that we're having. No certainty in what the government is saying. And I say to the Minister, what Lord Brown's amendment requires and why it's so important is on the face of the bill. I think what the people of this country would want is not some reconsideration of the policy in the future, but a certainty that those who have served with our armed forces or served us in whatever circumstance can be assured that the promises made to them are actually adhered to and kept. I cannot believe that we as a country would turn our back on those who've served with us. It is unbelievable that we should be in this situation. And I say to Lord Sharp, and I say to others who may feel it important that they vote with the government, what we are talking about here are men and women who have served our country, stood alongside our armed forces, and served with us to deliver the objectives of His Majesty's, Her Majesty's government as it was then. How on earth can we think it appropriate that the provisions of this bill to become an act and the treaty should apply to them? It's simply unacceptable, and as such, Lord Brown's amendment gives us a way of saying to the government, think again. We believe it should be on the face of the bill, and as such, I hope noble lords will support Lord Brown when he tests the opinion of the House.
Yeah. My Lords, once again, I'm very grateful to all noble lords for their contributions to this debate on these particular issues. My Lords, just to restate for the record, the government's priority is obviously to stop the boats, and though we have made progress, more needs to be done. We do need a strong deterrent. We need to operationalise this partnership with Rwanda, and it is only by applying this policy to everyone without a myriad of exceptions that the deterrent will work. We're not diminishing our responsibilities to provide support to those who are vulnerable, and we have ensured that the necessary support will be provided in Rwanda. We are sending the clearest signal that we control our borders, not the criminals who charge migrants exorbitant amounts to come here via illegal routes on unsafe small boats. My Lords, I will endeavour to deal with all the points that have been raised. Turning first to the noble lady Baroness Lister's points, I'll restate for the record that as part of the process, upon arrivals, individuals will only be treated as an adult where 2 immigration officers assess that their physical appearance and demeanour very strongly suggest they are significantly over 18. Emphasis on the word significantly. This is a deliberately high threshold, and the principle of the benefit of the doubt means that where there is doubt, an individual will be treated as a child pending further observation by a local authority, which will usually be in the form of a Merton-compliant age assessment. My Lords, with regards to the Noble and Learned Lord Hope's Amendment 3, as the Noble and Learned Lord correctly pointed out, Clause 9 of the bill clearly sets out that the bill provisions come into force when the treaty enters into force. And the treaty enters into force when the parties have completed their internal procedures. Furthermore, the government maintain periodical and ad hoc reviews of country situations, including Rwanda, and this will not change. My Lords, one of the things that we have discussed in previous debates on this subject is there will be real-time enhanced monitoring phase by the monitoring committee. The enhanced phase will ensure that the monitoring and reporting takes place in real time so that the monitoring committee can rapidly identify, address and respond to any shortcomings and of course identify any areas of improvement or urgently escalate issues which may place a relocated individual at risk of real harm. This enhanced phase is dealt with in paragraphs 106 to 112 of the policy statement. And I would say to my noble friend Viscount Hailsham that, of course, if the facts change, this means that the government would not be obligated to remove individuals under the terms of the treaty. And that may very well prompt the parliamentary occasion to which he referred. Quite what form such an occasion may take, I'm afraid I cannot say. Well, if I have anything to do with it, it will definitely include alcohol. My Lords,
my problem with this bill, my problem with this bill on both points is first that I'm asked to say something is safe when it is clearly not safe, and the government has said it isn't safe. What I'm really asked to say is that after all this has happened, it will be safe. But the government doesn't seem to explain to me exactly what's going to happen before we get to that. But I also have a problem. How can I possibly vote that it will always be safe? Surely it's a simple matter. I'm not very keen on lawyers and talking about it. A very simple matter of saying that if the monitoring committee recommends to the Secretary of State that Rwanda is no longer safe, then the Secretary of State can in fact change the situation as regards to Rwanda. Seems to me very simple. And if I had been the minister, the first question I'd have asked my civil servants is, what happens if the situation changes? And my civil servants wouldn't have left that room until they'd given me an answer. How did he allow his civil servants to leave the room?
Well, my lords, I've already stated that the government would not be obligated to remove individuals under the terms of the treaty if there has been a change, an unexpected change or otherwise, in the in-country situation in Rwanda.
He's using the phrase not being obligated. That just means they don't have to do it, but it doesn't actually alter the legal position.
The definition of the word obligated, my lords. My lords, the bill builds on the treaty and the published evidence pack, and it makes it clear in UK law that Rwanda is a safe country, and it does address the concerns of the Supreme Court. The courts have not concluded that there is a general risk of the safety of relocated individuals in Rwanda. Rather, the Supreme Court's findings were limited to perceived deficiencies in the Rwandan asylum system and the resulting risk of refoulement should any lack of capacity or expertise lead to cases being wrongly decided. And my lords, both my noble and learned friend Lord Stewart of Delton and I have dealt with exactly where Rwanda is in terms of ratification and so on. The Court of Appeal unanimously upheld the High Court's finding that a policy of removing individuals to a safe third country where their asylum claims would be determined did not breach the UK's obligations under the Refugee Convention, and the Supreme Court did not disturb that finding. The Supreme Court recognised that changes may be delivered in the future which could address those concerns. And my lords, those changes are being delivered. My lords, turning to motion F in the name of the noble Lord Brown, and spoken to powerfully, if I may say, by other lords. Once again, I want to reassure Parliament that once the UKSF Special Forces ARAP review has concluded, the Government will consider and revisit how the Illegal Migration Act and removal under existing immigration legislation will apply to those who are determined ARAP eligible as a result of the review, ensuring these people receive the attention they deserve. Can I just say, and I'll go a little further here, there is no intention, I would say to the noble Lord Lord Coker, to turn our backs on those who have served. My lords, finally, I'm sorry to say, to hear that the noble and learned Baroness Butler-Sloss doesn't like the government's amendment in lieu, but unfortunately I'm afraid there is very little else I can say on that particular subject. My lords, I beg to move.
Noble and learned friend moves his amendment. Could I just ask the noble Lord the Minister, he hasn't answered the question, what happens if there's a change in Rwanda and it is no longer safe?
I beg to differ with the noble and learned Baroness, and I appreciate that's a difficult place to be, but I think I have answered the question. As I said before on a number of occasions now, the government is not obligated to send anybody to Rwanda if the facts change.
I'm grateful to all noble lords who have spoken, but just picking up immediately the point that the noble Lord, Lord Sharp, has just made. He says that if matters change, then the government would not be obligated by the treaty to remove people to Rwanda. The problem for the minister is that clause 2 of the bill states that every decision maker must conclusively treat the Republic of Rwanda as a safe country, and that's without any limit of time. And furthermore, and the minister might care to read the section more carefully, because every decision maker, the words decision maker includes the Secretary of State himself. So he is obligated by the statute to assume that Rwanda is a safe country. Whatever the treaty may say, the statute binds him to do that. This is a ludicrous situation which the government is, for some strange reason, refusing to address. My lords, the situation does require to be looked at again by the other place. I therefore beg to move again my Amendment 3E in lieu and to test the opinion of the House.
The question is that motion B1 be agreed to. As many as of that opinion shall say content. The contrary not content. The question will be decided by a division. I will advise the House when voting is open. Voting is now open. Clear the bar. The question is that motion B1 be agreed to. As many as that opinion shall say content, the contrary not content. The contents will go to the right by the throne, the not contents to the left by the bar. The question is that motion B1 be agreed to. There have voted contents 266, not contents 227, so the contents have it.
Good. Yep, bigger majority than last time. Very good. We're getting straight into another one. I can't stand up when you're up.
Order.
Baroness Chakrabarti.
I beg to move. No.
I beg your pardon.
I'm so sorry, we forgot.
My Lords, I have already spoken to motion C that this House do not insist in its amendment 6B, to which the Commons have disagreed for their reason 6C. I beg to move.
With apologies, I beg to move motion C1, again already spoken to, and I would like to test the opinion of your Lordship's House.
The question is that motion C1 be agreed to. As many as that opinion shall say content.
Content.
The contrary not content.
Not content.
Contents will go to the sorry. The vote will be decided by a division. I will announce when the division is open. Voting is open. Clear the bar.
Well done.
Lords.
Sit down with a few well-chosen privy councillors.
I'm afraid, my Lords, that the question is that the motion C1 be agreed to. As many as of that opinion will say content.
Content.
The contrary, not content. The contents will go to the right by the throne, the not contents to the left by the bar. question is that motion C1 be agreed to. My Lords, there have voted contents 253, not contents 236, and so the contents have it. Motion D.
Order.
Motion D, Lord Sharp of Epsom.
My Lords, I have already spoken to motion D that this House do not insist on its amendment 7B, to which the Commons have disagreed for their reason 7C. I beg to move.
The question is that motion D be agreed to. Motion D1, Baroness Lister of Butterset. Not moved. The question is that motion D be agreed to. As many as of that opinion will say content, and to the contrary not content, the contents have it. Motion E, Lord Sharp of Epsom.
My Lords, I've already spoken to motion E that this House do not insist on its amendment 9 and do agree with the Commons in their amendment 9C in lieu. I beg to move.
The question is that motion E be agreed to. As many as of that opinion will say content. To the contrary not content, the contents have it. Motion F, Lord Sharp of Epsom.
My Lords, I've already spoken to motion F that this House do not insist on its amendment 10B, to which the Commons have disagreed for their reason 10C. I beg to move.
The question is that motion F be agreed to. Motion F1, Lord Brown of Ladyton.
I beg to move motion F1.
The question is that motion F1 be agreed to. As many as of that opinion will say content.
Content.
The contrary not content.
Not content.
The question will be decided by a division. I will inform the House when voting is open. Voting is open. Clear the bar. question is that motion F1 be agreed to. As many as of that opinion will say content. And to the contrary, not content. The contents will go to the right by the throne, the not contents to the left by the bar. Motion F1 be agreed to. My Lords, there have voted contents 275, not contents 218. So the contents have it.
Yes, that's the biggest.
My Lords, we will just give the House a few minutes for change of personnel before we move to our next business. Just waiting for the Minister. This is report of the Victims and Prisoners Bill. Lord Bellamy.
Lords, I beg to move this report be now received.
Question is that this report be now received. As many as of that opinion will say content. The contrary not content. The contents have it. In Clause 1, Amendment 1, Lord Russell of Liverpool.
My Lords, this will be a mercifully brief group, and I will speak primarily to Amendment 1, which is in my name, which has the great virtue of complete and utter simplicity, which was an attempt to get Her Majesty's Government to recognise that children are different to adults and have different needs and different requirements. And I'm glad to say that in the discussions that we have been having, particularly between the Children's Commissioner, the Victims Commissioner, and the Minister and his team, we have made significant progress in recognising in various places in the bill that children do have particular needs and are a particular group that need to be thought of in a particular way. And the reason behind that is simply the need to recognise children's unique and special characteristics. My Lords, I suspect, like many of us, one has been to meetings where different charities and others that help children have brought some parliamentarians together and listened to the experience of victims. And, my Lords, it's pretty searing to hear directly from victims who have suffered a whole variety of terrible things happening to them. But, my Lords, particularly searing is listening to children who have experienced this. And some of us who have been working in this area were privileged to listen to some of those children who very bravely spoke about their experiences, some of which were truly shocking. And indeed, in one instance, we not only had a victim talking very powerfully, immediately after that, we also had the victim's mother talking about the effect that it had had on her child and on her family. And in this particular instance, it was made even more ghastly by the fact that the perpetrator of her daughter was actually one of her grandfathers. Almost unimaginable, my Lords. But the needs of children who have gone through that sort of trauma are very specific. And however well intended it may be to say we will allow children to have access to what